Hello everyone and welcome to a rare tutorial here on Action Movie Dad. I'm going to run through really quickly how I did this carbonite in the grocery store bit. So I've already completed this comp work, but I'm going back and recording kind of a remake of it. So anyway, this is my After Effects composition, and I have the original piece of footage, which looks like this. It's me walking down the aisle, and right under this sign, I linger to the stuff in this one particular cabinet and then move along. So the very first step was to track the camera, which I've already performed. That's this 3D camera tracker, and it worked pretty well. I don't love the built-in tracker a whole lot. I love its tools and its plane creation tools, but its tracking has often left a little bit to be desired. In this case, it actually worked pretty well, so I'll give it some points. This is a difficult piece of footage, even though there's nothing else in it except for this static, this stationary object I'm moving past. There are a lot of reflections here, and we'll talk about the reflections later. But you can see me there walking along and reflecting in the wall, and all of these little bits of the aisle behind this really mess with the tracking, because what they're effectively doing is a reflection as a virtual image, as if there were things deeper behind the cabinet. And that can mess up a 3D camera tracker. But for the most part, it's figured out that that is garbage data, and it's tried to only give me points where there were solid physical objects to lock onto, and it's thrown out a little bit of this garbage data. I've had trouble with that before, but this one worked pretty well. So, if your piece of footage tracks nicely, that is beautiful. Sometimes you need to do something like garbage mat out, moving elements, and do a couple different things to get your track working well. But what I end up doing most often is jumping back to CS 5.5, which has the Foundry's camera tracker, which I find to be much more versatile if you really need to force a good track. But anyway, we'll work with this for now. We have our piece of footage tracked, which means I can use a lot of these little tracking points as jumping off points to create 3D elements, which is really cool. I've already created the 3D camera, and that is with this button right here once you've tracked. So I'm going to click on my piece of footage, and then I'm going to highlight the camera tracker effect. And you can see that brings up all the tracking points. It makes them visible here. And the first thing I did in this was I replaced this phrase single meals with smugglers. So to do that, I'm going to look up close at this sign and find a couple of the tracking points on it. You can create a null or a solid or some text near any of these individual points. And one of the even cooler things you can do is if you highlight multiple points, After Effects will try to guess will triangulate a 3D plane out of them. Now, the camera's moving kind of fast, and it's a little bit goofy. Oh, I forgot this is the sign that I replaced. So I'm trying to scroll through and watch these camera tracking points and look for a spot that it feels like these points are hanging onto the sign pretty nicely. I'm going to grab 3 points, holding down Shift while I do that, and that will create this virtual plane here, which I can now right-click and say, create a solid here. It looks like the angle isn't quite right for that sign, but it's pretty close. And if I play through the full piece of footage, it kind of sticks there. I can make this semi-transparent so you can see. You can see the center is probably sticking right to the beginning of that, or the top of that L in single pretty well. There's obviously motion blur involved here, so I'm going to turn on the motion blur on this level because that'll give me a more accurate placement of this piece. So the angle looks a little bit off, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually deal with it. I'm going to rotate it a little bit out this way. I'm going to kind of square it up to this sign. And now in my book, this perspective actually looks like the correct perspective lines for this sign. If I were to scale this down, it looks like it's connected now. So now that this track's in 3D space, what I can do is draw a really loose garbage mat around that phrase. And now I'm going to turn off the layer for a moment. I'm going to generate fill, and I'm going to fill it with this color, the color of the sign. Now the exposure changes and the lighting changes a little bit, so I'm going to put a keyframe on the color right there. And as you see, the layer is still turned off, and I need it off for now. If I reveal the keyframes by pressing U, you'll see there's one keyframe for this color right now on this frame. If I scrub back to here, I can now take the eyedrop tool from the effect and sample right there. It's a slightly different color. Not much, but I think this will make a difference. I'll go back to here. I'll sample it again. It looks like it gets a little bit darker in contrast here as it pushes back. And all the way back here, it's a similar color, but you'll see as I scrub forward and it gets up to here, it gets a lot brighter. So I'm going to sample the colors here. Maybe sample one in between. And then by now it moves up and off camera. So the last keyframe I'd really need is probably around here. I'll sample this color on the edge here. So if I turn this visible again and turn its opacity back up, I'm pressing T to reveal opacity, turning that all the way up. And now I'm going to press F to reveal the feathering on the mask. I'm going to feather this a few pixels. 20 seems fine now. The number will depend largely on the size of your solid, how much it's feathering it. I'm going to adjust the shape of this a little bit. Here we go. Now if I play this back, what I'll get is this solid is roughly being filled with sampled colors and tracking right along that sign and giving me a nice clean black sign. Now you'll notice there are a couple moments where the letters underneath become visible, and that's okay. I'm going to deal with that a little bit later by setting mask keyframes. If I make this, if I add some keyframes to this mask because it's tracked to the camera, it's very easy to just go through and make sure that at a few different points this sign is all the way covered. And that seems to be fine. And now, because I have a solid here on this sign aligned with everything, I can create a new text layer. I'm going to type the word smugglers. I'm still in my Star Wars font, so in my mind this this supermarket font looks a little bit like a bold Arial or something, sans serif font. I'm just going to go with a bold Arial. Here we are. Arial, the font, not the mermaid. We'll make it bold. We won't make it faux italic. And here's our word. I kind of like that. That seems like the general way these are written. I'm going to sample the white from one of these letters, which is actually probably white in the store, but it looks more gray in the footage. And I'm actually going to brighten that up a little bit more. Great. Now I can turn this into a 3D layer. Puts it up there. I can go to that solid right here, and I can press P, and I'm going to hold down Shift and press R. That will give me, it'll reveal the position and orientation. You can also reveal that by unwinding all of these dials, but it's easier and a little bit cleaner just to press P, Shift R. I'm going to now copy these two position bits. Control C to copy them, highlight my smugglers layer, and Control V to paste. So right now I also need to turn on the motion blur for smugglers. You'll see when I don't have it on, After Effects is virtually imagining this solid moving forward, so it actually messes up the intersection right here, which is kind of interesting. So I'll turn that on. Now it seems to work very well. And now I want to position it correctly on the sign, but I need to be careful not to just grab and move it, because that might move it in 3D space to the wrong spot. So I've got to use these little gizmos to slide it. You'll see that the mouse changed to have the letter X for the X-axis and Y here to move it straight down. And now that it's about in place, I'm going to scale the whole thing while holding Shift until it looks about the same size as the fonts on the other sign. I'm going to move it up a teeny bit more. And the orientation, as you'll remember, was kind of just a guess. So I'll make that a little bit smaller. But in any case, when that is done, I can play through and try to watch that sign as it moves across the footage. Now you'll see I'm running into these little problems where it looks like this is kind of bouncing up and down a little bit in a weird fashion. Sometimes that is related to tracking, and sometimes that is related to the motion blur steps on here. So it's aligned pretty well, and most people wouldn't notice it, but it's a little bit bumpy. And one of the things that I had to do when I did the original was I looked through the composition settings, which is up here, composition settings, or you can press Control K. And under the Advanced tab, you can slide the shutter angle up and down to figure out how much motion blur you'll have. So for example, if I dial this way up, watch, that sign gets really blurry. But really, my footage wasn't that blurry when it was being motion blurred. It was somewhere around here. And I just looked at reference pieces of the footage for that. And the shutter phase is basically what point in this blur process the actual picture is being taken. I'm explaining that poorly, but what it means is when a camera is moving around quickly and there's a lot of motion blur, the exact center of a motion blurred object depends a lot on what phase you're picking up between the frames. So if I slide this back and forth, you can see that when I let go, it's shifting around this text, which may not make a lot of sense. But you'll see as I drag it downward, it's favoring where it probably used to be, and if I drag this really forward, it favors where it's heading. So if I put that right at 0, which I think is the default, let me play it back, and you'll see that there are a couple parts where, let me zoom in here, where it bounces up and down counter to what the sign wants to do. So what I found in the other version of this was that I needed to set the shutter phase back a bit. So I'm going to start off with maybe not that far, but I'll try -50 or something. Okay, so now when I play this back, some of the little jolts and bounces, a few are still there. This looks a lot like the word smugglers. So I'm going to go back into my composition settings and dial the shutter phase back a little bit more. Now I'm going to play through that. And now we're getting a lot closer. This feels like about the right lock to this, enough that if you weren't really paying attention, that'll work just fine. So yeah, we've got the word smugglers here. And what's cool about this is it's a text layer, so you could say anything you want. You could say, I don't know, say whatever you want there. So now that that's all done, we're going to jump to creating Han Solo inside this freezer. Now, whenever you're working with a highly reflective surface, there are several things that will help make it look very realistic. So, as you can see, when I walk past this piece of the freezer, you can see the aisle behind the cameraman, behind me, reflecting. And in fact, you can even see me reflecting here as I walk past. And we're a pretty prominent part of the visual image here. I mean, you can see these delicious Stouffer's spaghetti and meatballs and French bread pizzas, which I'm very fond of. But one of the reasons they look real and like they're in there is because I'm reflecting in this piece of glass in front of them. So we're going to need to simulate what's inside the freezer and something that is outside the freezer. And I'm going to do that all via some solids that I grab. So I'm going to create a plane kind of in this general area. Now, these tracking points are on objects inside the freezer. You'll notice there aren't a whole lot on the actual body of the fridge unit. So if I were to grab a point way up here, way over here, and then maybe somewhere down here, it will triangulate this great plane for me. If I create that solid and I make it semi-transparent, as we play through, you'll see that that's locked really nicely to the face of all of these cardboard boxes. But from the parallax, you can kind of tell that that is actually inside this fridge unit. It's not really outside. It's not the actual surface. To create a mask that goes around the surface of this, I need to find a better frame and create a different solid. So I'll call this inside. And I'll go back to my tracker and find out if I can grab a plane that is based on points outside of the fridge. So it looks like right around here, there are some tracking points that are actually on the surface way out here, which is great. So if I like, I can highlight a few of these points. That's not right. That's part of that corner. That's part of the door. I need a third point, and I would ideally like it to surround this area. So let me see. Move a little forward. Okay. That point seems to be on the door. So if I create a plane right here using these 3 points, that should be a plane in 3D space that is actually out in front of the inside of this fridge. I'm going to press F11 to switch to a custom view, and I'm going to move over. So you can see my shot is taken from this camera right here. And if I go to the side of all of these objects, this blue piece kind of represents the outside of the fridge, and this red piece is generally tracked to the inside. It's not very straight. And they should be kind of parallel to each other. I'm going to trust my outer thing more than my inside thing because of the reflections. So now I have a placement for stuff that's on the glass and stuff that's behind the glass. I'm going to create a master mask that reveals the inside of the fridge. I'm going to position this using the little gizmos again. I'm going to scrub through the footage to make sure that at every point during the footage it's tall enough to function as a mask. And it looks like right at the end I get real close to losing it, but it stays with me. I'm going to cheat a little bit here, but I'm going to show you what I generally did. Is once I had this tracked plane, I would go to kind of a nice frame where I can see a lot of the door, and then I would draw a mask. Right here. I'm going to create a keyframe for that mask, and I'm going to scrub here. And it looks like when I'm right here, the mask goes off a little bit. And that must be because of slightly poor camera tracking. Could be because of bad guessing on where this plane went. But in any case, if I jump through here and throw in a couple keyframes to keep this mask shape right along this door, everything will work out fine. So in the official comp, I went through and I made sure that I popped out that sign and a little bit of other small details like the door handle that kind of comes in front of this. You can mask all of those out in this view if you want. Turn that to subtract mask. Create a few keyframes for it. I'm going to do a mediocre job at this time around. That pops the handle out a little bit. There's the inside of the handle. I got that on my other comp, but I'm not going to really mess with it right here. Yay, so something like that. So now when I turn this on to full opacity, you'll see that basically what it is it's a mask to that I can use to create stuff that's replacing this section. All of the glass, everything inside there, all of that. I will use a bunch of copies of this thing as the way to create my hole to put Han Solo in. So let's jump to the Han Solo part. Why not? I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to use my friend Element 3D. Now, I love Element 3D, and I use it for all of my 3D rigid object stuff. In fact, some of my non-rigid stuff, which is even cooler. But you need a model for this to work. And I'll talk a little bit about where I get models. Sometimes I go to TurboSquid. TurboSquid is great because you can look up just about anything you want. And look at that. They have these beautiful 3D models of Han Solo in carbonite. In fact, they got 3 of them. They might be by the same maker. Who knows? It's great. But the models on here, sometimes it's worth paying for them. This is $170. The cheapest one is this $119 version, but it's a 3ds Max version. I don't have 3ds Max, and so I don't really want to spend a lot of money to deal with this. Sometimes I will. If I'm being paid for a project, I'll use some of the budget for that. But I'm going to tell you about another fun site, which is called the 123dapp.com. Now, this is run by Autodesk, who make Maya, among other things. But it's this cool collection of apps, including this one called 123 Catch. I've used this app. It's really great. What you do is you walk around a stationary object, take a bunch of pictures of it, and it will generate a surfaced mesh for you that is compatible with things like Cinema 4D, Element 3D, and all those kind of wonderful things. Now, I'm going to plug this site because it also has a community. Right here under 3D models, you can see there's a bunch of 3D models designed to kick off or complete your own projects. So I started over here and just thought, what happens if I try carbonite over here? And it turns out a couple of wonderful artists have scanned Han Solo in carbonite. In fact, right on the website, you can view many of these projects in 3D. So this wonderful capture was created by Scott Diaz, and you can see it's pretty wonderful. It's this nice 3D model, and it features Han all the way down to his legs pretty darn well, which is perfect. So if you're signed in and a member of this community, you can grab this 3D model. On YouTube here, you can also see the description here. Click on that link for Han Solo. Now, I can use that model right out of the gate within After Effects using Element 3D, but I actually decided to clean up the geometry a bit in Cinema 4D, which is my 3D program of choice. I kind of took the geometry that came with it and tried to do a little bit of straightening out of everything, and also I removed some of the excess geometry. I clicked on the object, went to point mode, the rectangular selection, unchecked that. Sliced off that excess stuff. Now that I have this object here, I can use a trick called Mesh Axis Center. Center everything to the center of all these points and also align it to the world. Execute. What that does is it takes the geometry and kind of puts everything in the right direction. It's a little bit off. There we go. Feels kind of flat, and now we'll say execute this again. Great. Stand them up. Tink. Lovely. So now, Save that out, bring it into Element, click on the normalize size, so it kind of isn't too large. Let's see. He's mostly made up of these two texture swatches. They need a new diffuse pattern. I'm going to load that from a file in here. It would be, I believe, texture 1. Great. And now in here I'm going to go to texture 2, or texture 0, I mean. And one of the cool things about photogrammetry is that the lighting actually was preserved in this texture. So now we have this 3D Han, which is great. You can move all around him. And he's got texture a little bit as if he's been lit. You can still modify the lighting a little bit and get some different effects, but really I'm just going to go with him straight as he came. So say OK, and now I know that Han is being rendered somewhere in the scene. I'm going to go to group 1 and create a null for him, and if I zoom out you'll see that this null got created way over here, but where I want it is aligned with this inside solid, if you'll recall that. So I'm going to grab this guy's position and rotation by pressing P, Shift R, copy those, and I'm going to paste them to that null. And once I do, look, it puts Han right there. And if I scroll through the footage, you'll see that Han in 3D space is aligned with all this frozen food. Now I can just simply take the null object, scale it up, kind of find the point where I'd be seeing him straight on. Doing a little bit of tweaking, scale him up so he fits in this space. And now that mask that I made earlier, this solid here, I'm going to use that as a track matte. So I'm putting it below, I'm pressing toggle switches, which is also F4 on a PC. And I'm going to tell the element layer to use that solid as an alpha matte. And now it puts Han right here, visible only through this one section. Now, because of this size, there's some overlapping section over here that I don't really like. So in Element, I ended up adding an extra bit of stuff around him. I just created a cube, scaled it, widened it out like this, and made it tall. And what this is doing is it just filling in those sides where you could see the overlap. And I'm going to use one of my metal presets from Pro Shaders 2. I think I used maybe something like the metal dirty chrome or something like that. No. Something like that. I want to use something that's kind of the same tone as the carbonite. Sure. So that'll just render some extra stuff in here. You notice there's a little bit of a seam right here, and though I probably didn't get them all, if I turn on the motion blur, that sometimes covers some of it, and if it doesn't, I can always modify my mask a little bit. As you'll recall, the mask has keyframes on it, so anytime it goes off, get some keyframes in there. It's pretty cool. Now if we watch this little section played back, I'm going to set to half resolution for now. So now you can see this effect really starting to come together already. You can see Han is in 3D right here, which is pretty cool as we pass by, which gives us some nice depth. Lovely. So now that that is roughly placed, I can still mess with the null that Han is located around if I ever need to reposition him. In this case, the tracking does actually go slightly off when the camera is straight on, and I think it's because of those distracting reflections. So I set a few keyframes to make him feel a little bit more solid, and in fact I'm going to rotate him a little bit more upright so his up and down line gels more with that up and down here. And I think that it gels here, so I'm going to create a keyframe wherever it seems to work the best, and then find the spot where it is off kilter again. Fix that up. I'm going to turn these into soft keyframes with F9. That'll just keep him correctly aligned. It's a rough job, but you can always play through your own composition until you're happy with it. Turn off that solid. So this is half the battle, is getting this guy here. I'm going to also add a real smart motion blur to him. Turn that down a little bit, maybe to 0.3. Maybe back up a little bit. Let's try 0.4. Now as I play through, he'll motion blur as we pass by him a little bit. Though maybe the default setting is fine. Great. I'm also going to color correct, or actually key correct. I'm going to use the color matcher and set him to match colors from the original footage. Makes him a little bit more yellow, but it works fine. He's kind of behind here, so it's all right. Turn that up a little bit. Great. So now the missing component is these reflections here. Now to make this look a little bit more realistic, what we need is stuff reflecting in the glass in front of him. Now, there's no great way to extract the reflection that used to be on there. As a reminder, when I walked by before, you can see all of this stuff reflecting in the window. And mostly, it looks just like this bank of freezers, because that's what is also behind me. So, I'm going to use actually a fake reflection. Now the way we'll do that is let's turn back on Han and everything else. And I'm going to add a new adjustment layer called separator. I'm going to spell it wrong the first time around just to keep everyone on their toes. And then this separator adjustment layer, what it does is if I add anything above it, this adjustment layer disrupts the 3D stacking order. So if I had, for example, this solid here, and I had another copy of it back here, we'll fill this one blue or something. So normally, without this separator here, if this blue one were in front, it would be visible, and if it pushed behind the red one, it would become invisible. Now, a reflection is virtually like having something back behind it showing at partial opacity. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have this separator layer, it'll fake put this thing that's behind in front. See how that works? So I'm going to use that same principle with this stock photo of a supermarket. Look at that. It's not the same at all, but it looks pretty similar to this freezer section. I'm going to bring it in as a 3D layer. I'm going to put it above the separator. I'm going to turn it 3D. I think I still have the position and rotation of this inside thing copied, so I'm going to press paste. Great, and that puts it right there. So as I scroll through, this is putting this kind of just inside here. That's close, but not exactly right. The reflections are really about an aisle width behind everything. And I'm going to duplicate this mat that I have and put it up here. And I'm going to use it as an alpha mat for this reflection piece. Now you'll recall that there's this separator here, and what that does is it makes it so when I scroll past here, that reflection is going to show up in front of all of the stuff behind it, even though it technically shouldn't be. Now because Han is actually an Element 3D layer, I think that this would actually work even without the separator, but it'll matter for later. And now we need to do some guesswork. The reflections back here you can see in these side windows, and you can see about how fast they're moving based on the parallax. I've just arbitrarily guessed how far back to push this card in Z. And what I'm going to do now is play through just right this section right here and look how fast this layer is moving compared to the actual reflected background pieces. And I'm just going to try to match those speeds well. The speed of how fast it moves is really affected by how far away it is from camera, because the camera is kind of counter-arcing around this point. In this version, this reflection was moving too slow relative to the real reflection, so I'm going to push it even farther back. I'm going to scale it up, and I'm also going to try to rotate it to seem parallel. And as I scrub through, you can kind of see down here, it looks like the bottom of the other bank of fridge is reflecting, and you can see kind of a line that goes right across here. So I'm going to scale up my comp until this black line looks like it goes right through there too. See how that works? So now when I play back, this fake reflection is moving at about the same speed as the real reflections in the scene. And this black line kind of feels aligned. That's pretty good. So add to that some motion blur, and also, because this isn't a perfectly clear glass, it's like a double paned multi-image kind of thing going on, I'm going to add a box blur. Actually, I'm going to add an obsolete fast blur. I don't know why it's obsolete now. I think it's still great. And I'm going to do a little bit of a vertical blur. That just makes it so you can't really see what's going on here. Also, you'll notice my layer isn't long enough. And so what I'm going to do for that is use my good old friend Reptile. I'm going to go to Effect, Stylize, Reptile. And I'm going to expand this to the right by unfolding, to the left, which means you'll see my 3D layer right now is ending here, and so it's only in view for this part. But if I turn up the expand left, it'll mirror itself down that way and give me more virtual reflection. Now, this is all in front of Han right now, just so you guys can see what's happening here. And one other thing that I might get called out on is you can actually see me walking here, reflecting in the window. And then suddenly, there's nothing, and then you can see me resume walking over here. Now, I have a great solve from this from an old package that my friend Aaron Rabinowitz was putting together for All Bets Are Off Productions back in the day. He had these wonderful stock people that you could buy, and I have this guy. He's appeared in the background of a couple of Action Movie Kid videos, which is kind of cool, and all he is a stock pre-keyed guy who walks, takes a little breath, and then keeps on walking. You can see him appearing as an infrared character in the background of the Target Heat Vision video from way back in the day. I think it was called How to Find Your Kid at Target. And he's also in the background of one of the Toys R Us commercials we did a few years ago. But anyway, he is great because in this particular composition, I need something to move past right when I'm walking past. And so what I've done is I've kind of found the moment where you can see my virtual reflection, my legs, you can see them right here, are about to reflect in the glass. I'm going to kind of take him, try to make him about the right size, and use this small part of the animation where he's taken a few steps in front of this glass. All I need is a little bit of motion that feels like a human. And if you'll watch, I've lined it up kind of well. My feet are lower, so I'm going to go to the reflection comp and move him lower. And now when I play this back, you get this sort of impression of someone reflecting and walking and taking his next step and appearing in this window. So it's pretty close. He moves a little bit too fast? A little bit too fast. So I'm going to keyframe his position in this reflection comp. I'm sorry, if you didn't see, this is all a pre-comp that I'm using. Right here as the reflection, not just that one layer by itself. That's why when I jump over to this comp and adjust him, he's being adjusted in here. Anyway, sorry if I didn't explain that well. I'm going to add a position keyframe when he does kind of line up. Boop. Then move down to here. And note that by here, he's moved too far, so I'm going to slide him back in here. So he's only moving about that far. It's going to do this little moonwalk maneuver here. And that looks a little bit weird here, but watch how it looks in the reflection comp. It will look like my reflection disappears, he takes another step, and then reflection appears here and continues to walk. That's all good and well, but this is really clear right now. And watch what happens when I turn down the opacity of this piece. Remember who's behind there? It's our good old buddy Han. So I've got to find the right amount of opacity. I'll try somewhere around 20. I'm also going to add some brightness and contrast adjusting to this whole thing so I can try to approximate what these other reflections look like. They go to a real black in some areas, and also they're probably not so saturated. And you can obviously mess with these settings a bunch, but the bottom line is, now that they're done, when I play through this little section, my glass is really reflective right now. But because it is something actually behind Han, it parallaxes the way a real reflection would. So not perfect, but it gives a pretty good hint of what a real reflection would be like. I'm going to adjust the contrast a little bit more in here. Darken it a little bit. There we go. Now we're just seeing this little bit of it. And one of the cool things you can do, since this is a virtual reflection, is right on the comp itself, I could add a little mask right here. Actually, maybe not on that, but maybe on the track mat, I can add a little mask that subtracts the reflection, because I want you to be able to see Han pretty well. If I add a subtract and then I really feather out that mask a lot, I can now kind of I can now kind of pick and choose where the reflection is really visible and where it's a little bit more less distinct. People do this in movies a lot when they're filming characters in cars. You can notice it sometimes that the reflections are killed right in front of their face a little bit. And even though it's not that realistic, it is really clear for understanding someone's in a car or whatever. But anyway, now the other thing that I did is right when you're in front of him, I want you to be able to see him the best. So the reflection opacity is going to be its lowest right here. I'm going to set it at maybe 30. But then as I scroll back, I'm going to keyframe the opacity of it up a little bit more. And then same thing for when I go past it and get all the way to this side, I'm going to turn it back up as well. And that just is a little trick that I think helps you get the gag for that moment. It's not really realistically what happens, but if it optically fools you, that's great. Again, I'll mention that I haven't perfectly keyframed the mask here, so there are a few spots where you can see the seams. But I hope this gives you a good idea of how you can go about simulating an object behind glass in a 3D tracked environment. I really love the way this effect works because you really get this sense of glass being there if you can match the parallax pretty well. And I knew that going in, this was going to be one of the hardest things to match about it, and I was really happy that the solution was so simple. Because even though the reflection in this window doesn't really match this window, what's inside it is so different, meaning the Han inside there is so different than these brightly colored boxes, that you still get a sense that there's grocery aisles reflecting back there. If I did my job of lining up this stock character walking through there well enough, you don't really pay attention to him. I think I blurred him out even more in my final one. And one of the other last things that I did in the final was I duplicated this track mat a few more times and utilized one of the pieces of stock footage of puffy smoke. This is from Action Essentials 2. I just threw that in here, made it 3D, pasted the orientation of that inside the fridge location. Scale that up a bit or something. I think I moved it over to the side and then used that duplicate alpha matte, turned it down. And I think I did that twice. Did one kind of on the left flanking him there and one on the right. I guess his right. And that gave a little bit of life to what's inside the freezer. A little bit of steam. So anyway, as you balance all of that stuff out, you'll end up with a pretty great result. I'm going to try to clean up this project file, and if I can get it organized, I will post it here so you guys can grab a copy of this if you want. To use the Han in 3D, you do need the plugin element from videocopilot.net, but if not, it doesn't have to be Han in here. You could honestly do a duplicate of these guys. You could honestly put in really whatever you wanted back there. Yeah, really anything that you want to mask off with this alpha, you could just drag and get them in here too. And the cool thing about that reflection layer is it adds this great sense of realism to this, which is cool. You really feel like whatever you're putting in there is inside that freezer. He's possibly pushed a little bit far back, if we're being honest, but Kind of cool, right? Whatever you want to put in a freezer. I think I just found the thumbnail for this video. Speaking of which, I hate making thumbnails for videos. I don't know why. I find it tedious. It's after you've already like finished a video and now you have to go do it. So let's, I'm gonna do it right now. Make you guys wait around while I do it. There we go, that's kind of funny. Now I just need a title that's kind of unique, that hasn't been, that no one really... How about this? There, yeah, that's a good one. And let's make it real clear what I'm talking about. Frozen stuff behind a reflective pane of glass tutorial. Did I spell stuff wrong? Probably. Nice. Let's save that thumbnail. And now let's post this thing to YouTube. Let's upload it. And we'll see you guys on the other side. Have a great day.